All right, welcome everyone to May, and I actually have a very quick video that I want to put out, and I'm going to try to do this as fast as possible. I want to do another COVID data update because tomorrow we are due to make a decision. The governor is going to make a decision whether our county should stay in phase 3 or not. According to the rules, we are above the threshold for hospitalizations and cases to go back to phase 2. Some counties have done that, but here's my conclusions right here, and then I'm going to support this with the data. I believe that we should not move back based on these thresholds. We are indeed above the thresholds by about 10 to 20%, but exponential growth under these conditions is unlikely. I'm going to back these all up, and I'm going to show you the shape of the curve. The shape of the curve suggests that we are at or near the top of the curve of both cases and hospitalizations. And we can't even see the curve as far as COVID deaths go right now. So we can't even make a decision because there's very little of a curve to catch up on to make a decision about going back. There are basically some rules that are imposed that will be assessed every 3 weeks starting tomorrow. And I want to say, by my own collection of the data and assessment of these rules, I believe that there would be no benefit to going back to phase 2 under these conditions. The rules were made under unvaccinated conditions. Let me show you why I think this in the data. So I want to start with the ending, and I want to go back now in time. I went forward in time to show you the ending. Now I want to go back in time through my data updates. I've been doing this for more than a year now, and about half dozen times I have made a prediction based on where I thought the data would go. This was before the vaccine in most cases. And I was thinking that we were near the top of the curve. And I was right all 6 times. And I think that again. So I don't think we should use a threshold to push us back into another phase if we're already at the crest of the wave. And so I also said on March 19th that we would have a coming bump in cases. And that's what we're seeing right now. I always hope that it'll be smaller than it is. And that's the same issue that they had in Israel and the UK when they were going through this. We always want it to be over sooner than it is. But there's signs that we are almost there. Back to January 19th, I was saying I thought we were past the peak as a nation. I think it happened on January 6th. It felt a little premature to be saying that on January 19th, but cases continued to go down. The Great Plains states were actually the first states to have outbreaks for the winter surge that we had of COVID. But I saw some signs in the data on November 22 that they would start to go down, and they did. On October 4th, I talked about universities. People were worried about universities opening and causing spikes. And they did cause some spikes, but they were definitely contained by the policies the universities put up. Even with very different policies that were more lax or more restrictive, they worked. And this is the where I talked about that. On August 1, I said Florida and Texas are following Arizona's path because on July 18th, I asked a question. Will Florida and Texas follow Arizona's path? I saw some signs in the data that they were following that path, and that's why I made that conclusion. All this is on YouTube. You can go back and look at it, and I can talk about the things I got wrong on another podcast, but I want to say I think this way of looking at the data is pretty robust and proven by the track record that we have here. Because I was not only looking at where the data was at, that's what the thresholds are, present tense, where is the data at? But the question is, where is the data going? Not just the slope of the curve, but the second derivative, the way the slope is sloping, okay? And if you look at that, you see evidence that for King County and for Washington as a state right now, the slope is sloping down. It is going up or flattening in some way. Beyond the noise, you can't tell much more than that. But if you look at the curve, and that's why I want to show you the curves right here. You have to stand back. You can't just look at 1 day of data. You have to look at weeks of data. And when I was looking at that, that's where I made the basis of my predictions I just showed you for all of these cases. that we had. And then there was a post-vaccination wave in Michigan in April. And I was looking at that very closely, and I made the same kind of prediction. I thought we were near the top of the wave, and we were. So this works post-vaccination as well. If anything, it works a little better post-vaccination, smaller susceptible category. So now we appear to be at the top of the peak for King County's post-vaccination wave, and that's why I think it would be a mistake to move back to phase 2. Honestly, if we move back to phase 2, I am 99% certain that we'll be moving again back to phase 3 again, because like I said, I'm 99% certain that we're at the top of the wave right now, so we'll be below the threshold in 3 weeks no matter what we do. But let's not keep this uncertainty going on. Business owners not knowing how much capacity they'll be able to have, restaurants not knowing if they'll be able to do things back and forth. This going back and forth type thing, we're triggering a threshold, but we are an organic society, and we've got to look at more than just whether we are above the threshold. So looking at the curvature of the line, this is the example of what I'm showing. This is my favorite kind of graph because it lets you see things like the curvature and lets you see that on this kind of graph, this is hospitalizations by state, and this was from back in July, that last COVID update that I put the slide up of. And you see right here that Arizona is definitely at the top of its wave. Texas, it looks like it's approaching the top of the wave, and Florida looks like, it's still going up, but you see that Florida was curving down a little bit, and hopefully Florida was moving to the top of the wave as well. I put this up on July 18th. On August 1st, and this is zooming in a little bit more so you can see a little bit more clearly what's going on with Arizona. It's definitely curving down in the case of Arizona. And I made a prediction that these would not be complex shapes, but they would be simple shapes. Basically, the curvature would continue. And this is 2 weeks later on August 1st. And actually, I think I got the wrong graph. But on August 1st, it actually continued to go. So I threw this together really fast because the deadline is tomorrow. And I don't want to waste any of your time by showing you. You can go back to the August 1st and you can see how it actually was the top of the curve for all 3 of these states, including California. But California is a much more complex situation. Oh, here I have it. Okay, good. That shows you where it goes. That shows you that it actually did curve down on August 1st. So looking at the curvature of the curve is something that actually helps. Curves curve, and that's why you can look at it. But it's hard to come up with a computer program that can analyze it. Your 2 eyes can do what the complex computer program can be programmed to do the same thing. So the other thing I know about is looking globally. There are 2 other countries that are farther down the vaccination path. I talked about Israel, and Israel was a few months ahead of us in vaccinations because they really focused on it. The UK actually was about the same rate of vaccinations, but in a sense they sort of doubled their rate because they vaccinated people with just 1 dose first because of limited supply. They delayed the 2nd dose. There was a lot of debate over whether this is a good idea or not. But I believe that from the UK data I'm going to show you, that was actually the best choice, but the choice that we're doing is fine too. We're getting there. We're just not getting there quite as fast because we chose to fully vaccinate rather than partially vaccinate. Both Israel and the UK have crushed the curve, and they are dropping straight down on the drop-down graphs that I always show on these. I just want to, if you go back, you can look at the Israel data, and the important thing is when you break it down by age, as you would expect, unvaccinated groups continue to experience the epidemic after the vaccinated groups started to have cases and hospitalizations go down. This is exactly what you want, and it's why you vaccinate the at-risk groups first. We're seeing the exact same pattern here in Washington State. So these are the unvaccinated groups, and you can see this is where the groups got vaccinated, and there's a little plateau. After 50% were vaccinated with the first dose, there's a little plateau where there's sort of an outbreak among the unvaccinated. But it's something that the society as a whole can handle. It is not the harbinger of exponential growth, quite the opposite. And this is the latest data from Israel. Look how it's dropping straight down, almost off the graph on this drop-down plot of cases. And so you see that Israel is definitely working. The United Kingdom, also working. These are not population corrected, by the way. And so if you look at the US, even on the unpopulation corrected scale where we're zoomed out, you can see that it is definitely dropping straight down as a nation. So here's Israel's data, and this is if we go 2 months back. Where was Israel at the time? Israel was actually on a little plateau. You notice how they have those couple of plateaus where they go flat instead of dropping. Well, it looks like the US as a whole experienced a bump, just like what Israel experienced. And again, that's what the last data update said to expect. And so this is, again, I want the data to drop faster than it does. But when I see the data doing this, I'm a little frustrated and a little impatient, but I am not losing hope. And so you can see right here, I've pulled out 2 states, Michigan and Washington. Michigan is about 33% more populous than Washington, but other than that, you can actually see that Washington, as a total caseload, per capita caseload, Washington is doing much better than Michigan as a whole. And you can see that Michigan had a recent post-vaccination wave, but you could see it start to curve down before it started to drop precipitously. Washington, I want you to zoom in on that, and I want you to see how Washington's curve as a whole is starting to curve down. If I zoom in on it right here, you can definitely see, it's even, if you look over the past week, you can make the argument that Washington has been flat. And so I really hope the policymakers will look at this data and put it in context. Washington as a state is not experiencing exponential growth. If anything, they are flat. King County as a county, as you see, we are experiencing a bump as well. And the thresholds for the county moving from phase 2 to phase 3, or backwards from phase 3 to phase 2, are shown right here. And as we said, the cases on the top are above the case threshold for the county. The hospitalized cases on the bottom are above the hospitalized threshold. I was hoping the hospitalized cases would be a little bit lower than they were, but it looks like they're tracking just about proportionately with positive cases so far. But the thing that is not tracking proportionately in a good way is deaths. Look at, there's a little tiny bump of deaths where you end up with about 3 or 4 a day. Each of those is definitely a tragedy. We've got a county of 2.2 million people here. And so we are not experiencing exponential outbreak. Quite the opposite. The vaccine is preventing deaths in the most susceptible population. The younger population it's still worse than the flu for the younger populations, and the flu can kill people. So I want to say that this is not saying that this isn't dangerous or that these aren't bad, but it's much less bad than it was before. And it's much less bad than the case where we came out of phase 2 into phase 3 before. That's why I don't think we should turn back now. Now that's the data that's available on the King County site. I've been collecting data every single day. I log in and collect my own data. This is slightly differently reported. It's reported by day of reporting rather than day of incident. And so the curves as overall look roughly the same, and that's what matters here. And so here's the King County in blue, Snohomish County in orange. It's not population corrected. Snohomish is about 1/3 as populous as King. And you can see that these counties have so much mixing. They're so similar that they're pretty much following the same curves. And they're both above threshold right now, although Snohomish might be slightly below threshold. Maybe that's because the outbreaks started way back in 2020. They started in Snohomish County first. I don't know. But what we can say is King County is definitely above case threshold. Snohomish might not be. Here's the hospitalizations on the day reported, and you can see that King County is definitely above the threshold, although today's data is actually technically below the threshold, so that's the first piece of good news, but it's the first day below the threshold we've had in more than a week. And so we're definitely above the threshold for King County. Snohomish has stopped reporting every day, and that's one thing I've got to say. If we're in a state of emergency, please report the data every day so I can go and I can collect it and I can analyze it. I'm a little bit frustrated that Snohomish is not reporting this anymore, but Snohomish is reporting something that King is not. Snohomish is reporting the number of people currently hospitalized and the number of people on ventilators. So you can see that this shows that we are, currently hospitalized has gone down and gone up, and Snohomish does not report on weekends. That's why the data has breaks in it. But notice that way back in December, we had 120 people in the hospital with COVID for Snohomish County. Today, we have 40. That is a big difference, and that's a big difference in what the hospital can handle. The hospitals are not nearly as taxed in our part of the country as they were, for example, in Michigan just a month ago. The best thing is that Snohomish tells you how many people are currently on ventilators. And a couple of days ago, this actually was down to 0. It's now crept up to 2. But this number is hanging around 0, 1, or 2 for the past week or so. And at the height of the epidemic, back around the turn of the new year, we had about, it looks like 15 or 16 people on it. So, in fact, I believe I have this number wrong. I was looking at the hospital admissions. So I say 2 people are on ventilators, where at the time there was about 10. But still about 5 times as many people were on ventilators the last time we had this number of hospital admissions. And this is going from this graph, which is hospital admissions, to this graph, which is currently hospitalized. I want to make this as fast as possible, and I'm going down a rabbit trail. But I just want to say, I can explain this more. Go ahead and ask me questions in the comments. Basically, things are much better now. They're about at least 50% better. They're probably about twice as good right now in terms of people who are staying in the hospital. How long people are staying in the hospital is down. Now, these people are still very sick, and the 2 people on ventilators, I want to get that back down to 0, and I want to keep it at 0. But we've got to say, it is no longer an emergency. We are not going to run out of ventilators anytime soon. And that is what the decisions need to be made on when we're talking about an entire county, an entire state, an entire country. So, this is where my conclusions are. Exponential growth of the virus under these conditions is unlikely. We are supposed to prevent exponential curving up, and if anything, we are seeing curving down or flattening, even in King County, which is the worst looking of the data that I've showed you. As bad as things look in King County, Michigan's post-vaccination wave was much worse. It was much worse than anything I was expecting, and honestly, Canada was worse than I was expecting, but it looks like they have endured the waves as well. So we have already changed how we interpret the thresholds. About a month ago, the governor announced that before we said if cases or hospitalizations were above the threshold, or that you would move back from phase 3 to phase 2. Recently, a month ago, they said we would change that to it needs to be and. Okay, that's great, and it's very possible that Snohomish will fulfill the or criterion. Doesn't look to me like King County will fulfill it. It looks like King County is and above the thresholds by about, less than 50%, less than closer to 25 to 20% for the case of both of those thresholds. And the hospital one actually looks worse for King County proportionately. So all that is to say, we are above the thresholds, we are close in cases, and we're pretty close when it comes to hospitalizations. For all these reasons, looking at these curves, and these curves don't go like this and then they suddenly go up. I don't see a case like this. So making the same call that I've made many times before, I was saying that this is not an emergency that will respond to moving back from phase 3 to phase 2. So this is my voice getting out here as one scientist. Yeah, I'm a structural immunologist, but I've been looking at these data for a long time, and I'm used to looking at kinetic data. So take it for what it's worth. But I do have this track record. My publication record is these YouTube videos. I have not changed any of them. You can go back and you can find out where I was wrong. But I was right that the curves were curving down, and it looks to me like the same thing is happening again in King County. Let's not move back to phase 2 needlessly, because that will cause some harms that are greater than the harms that I fear from not moving back to phase 2, from keeping things as open as they are, which is still fairly restricted. That's my piece as a citizen. This is all I can say. I don't really vote on this, except every 4 years we vote for the governor, right? So I want to encourage everyone to look at the data for yourself. Make the decision for yourself, and in whatever way is appropriate, make your voice heard. All right, that's my voice. I just want to remind you one last thing. I said this before, that if we follow Israel's path, we can be where they are at now in about 2 months. We're now a month and a half after I said this, and I think we are still on that path. Like I showed you, at least as a nation, we appear to be on that path, and it's just that King County, possibly because we did so well early on, we have more of a susceptible population in the younger ages at this point in the epidemic. And yeah, so argue with me if you want to. I can take it. But if you agree with me, I'd just encourage you to remember this. Remember the choices people are making and the basis they're making them on. And it's our job as a citizen to remember. And that's what I have this memory for. All right. Let's hope I'm right. And I'll probably be back in a couple weeks to see if I was right or not. You can hold me to it. All right. See you then.